Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Cheryl Jennison DeProsa, and today I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Gino Sigismondi. And Gino is going to walk us through on how to choose a microphone. I think this is one of the biggest questions we get asked all the time is, which mic should I choose? And there's a lot of factors that go into that, so we're going to dig into it today. But before we do that, just a few items I'd like to make a point of at the top. First of all, as we all are aware, things are a little bit different right now, and so we are not recording from our usual controlled environment. We are both coming live from our homes, so please be forgiving if we run into any internet or audio issues. We just want to make sure that we continue getting this information out to you. So if we run into audio or internet issues, please be patient and we'll try to work through those. But I think we should be good to go. Second of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. It will be available in about 1 to 2 days, give or take a couple of business days after today's broadcast, so please be patient. But once it is edited and ready, it will be available for on-demand viewing at shure.com/webinars. And that is a great page because not only does it host information about our upcoming webinar, but it also has all of our past on-demand webinars. So there's a lot of great on-demand webinars across a lot of audio topics. So please feel free to go there, peruse all of our past webinars, shure.com/webinar, and learn about all sorts of great stuff. Second of all, as we go through the session today, if you have any questions, please type them into the question pane. If you do not see the question pane and you are dialing in through the web app, you should see a little question mark and a circle. You can click on that to access the question view. If you are using the GoToWebinar app, a desktop app, you should see a dark gray toolbox with an orange box with a white arrow in it. If you click on that orange box with the white arrow, you should get access to the question pane. So ask any questions that you have as we go along, but please note that we will be saving those for the end of the session. So type in your questions, be patient, we'll answer them at the end. All right, that wraps up all the boring stuff. Let's get into the learning. Take it away, Gino.
All right. Thanks, Cheryl. And good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're at. And thanks again for joining us. As Cheryl mentioned, we're doing things a little bit differently, including turning our webcams on, which we don't normally do. But for this particular topic, I thought it actually is kind of interesting because I'm going to do a few demos with some microphones in a little bit, and it's often helpful to get a visual of what's going on, as well as being able to hear what's going on. So, when we're talking about microphones and the usage and application of microphones, there's really sort of two critical areas. The first one is choosing the microphone, selecting the microphone, which we're going to talk about today. And then the second part of it is microphone placement, which is a whole nother topic in and of itself, which we don't have time to go into today. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point where we get into some more specific microphone techniques. But what we want to, again, leave you with today is how to choose a microphone. And really that phrase is chosen specifically because I can't tell you which microphones to use for every application out there, right? There's simply too many different applications for us to go through all of them. And on top of that, microphone choice largely gets to be very personal. So you can't necessarily just give a blanket statement of this is the best microphone for this and that's the best microphone for that. And it, cut and dry like that. It's not how it works. That's one of the reasons we make so many microphones. People often ask us, why do you make so many microphones? It's like, well, because there's so many different possible applications. So what we hope you leave with at the end of the webinar today is the tools or the knowledge to be able to look at all the different microphone choices that are out there and kind of make an intelligent selection for the one that's going to fit your application best. And so kind of take you through the thought process. So to start with, the first thing we need to cover are some basics of microphones, some basic characteristics. And then once you know what those characteristics are, then we'll kind of give you some samples of some different applications and how you apply the knowledge of those characteristics to choosing the correct microphone. And at the very end, we'll get and do a little bit of microphone myth busting as well before we get into the Q&A, because it's in the audio business in particular, there tends to be a lot of mythology that gets out there. Before we move into the presentation here, I'll just mention, in case anyone is curious, the microphone that I am using is a Shure SM7, which is kind of almost more of a broadcast style of microphone, becoming very popular for podcasting as well, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, it's just by way of curiosity. If you want to know what you're hearing today, that's it. I'll also add too that the demos we're going to do are more just very kind of to paint some very broad strokes, to hear some very obvious things and not to do any subtle listening. And the main reason for that is because whenever you're using a webinar or a meeting, a web meeting type service for real-time audio, there's a lot of data compression happening. It's something that's called a codec that actually processes the digital audio to make it something that can effectively be sent in real time all over the world via the internet. And these things have a pretty dramatic effect on the audio. In fact, yesterday, Cheryl and I were just kind of trying this out. And I thought, what if I actually, play some acoustic guitar and listen to like what a nice condenser mic sounds like? And it was like, forget it. You can't even tell. The codec doesn't do justice to the audio quality. So we won't be doing any critical listening today, but we will be able to listen to a few things. All that said, let's move on here. Okay, so a microphone. First of all, what is a microphone? The definition of a microphone is an instrument for converting sound waves into electrical energy variations, which can then be amplified, transmitted, or recorded. So a very fancy way of saying basically a microphone is a device that is sensitive to sound waves, which again is the wave that is caused by air molecules compressing and expanding. That's pretty much all a sound wave is, those molecules compressing and expanding as we speak or as a loudspeaker moves. That also pushes air molecules in a way that presents this wave. So when the wave encounters the microphone element itself, again, the microphone has one job and one job only, and that is to take that variation in air pressure and convert it into a varying electrical signal. A varying voltage actually is what we end up using in the audio realm here. So that's all a microphone is supposed to do, and that's a point that's worth making because sometimes there's a misconception that someone knows they need a microphone because they want their voice to be louder, and they buy a microphone. But the microphone in and of itself doesn't make your voice louder. That's all the microphone does, is make your voice into an electrical signal that can then be connected to other audio components that then go and make it louder. Another way to think of it as a microphone is what's called a transducer, right? A transducer is anything that takes one form of energy and turns it into another. So there are, here's the primary microphone characteristics that we're going to go over today. The operating principle, which is how the microphone does what it does, its directional response, and its frequency response. And then we'll discuss real quickly the electrical output and the physical design of the microphone, which of course are also important when you're thinking about what you're going to connect the microphone to. What is that next device in the signal chain, as well as the physical design of the microphone itself. Okay, so operating principle, how the microphone does what it does, how the method it uses, the technology that it uses to convert sound waves into an electrical signal. There are many different types of microphone technologies out there, and some of them tend to be a little bit more specialized and or historical, meaning that we don't really see them very much anymore. So we're just going to focus on the primary types of microphones that you see being used or produced today, and that's the dynamic microphone and the condenser microphone. The ribbon microphone, we'll talk about that one as well. That's really more of a specialized type of dynamic microphone that has kind of got a niche application, but they've become more popular in recent times. So we'll be sure to include a little bit on those. But dynamic and condenser, those are really the main ones that we care about. So here we kind of see an example of each, of course, from the Shure lineup. An example of a dynamic microphone would be the Shure SM58, probably the most popular microphone ever in the world, still a top seller. Most people, when you ask them to to picture a microphone, they kind of picture that ice cream cone shaped handheld microphone, and that would be an example of that one there. But again, it's important to stress that just looking at a microphone doesn't tell you what's going on inside of it. There are handheld microphones that look a lot like an SM58 that might be a condenser microphone. There's even been handheld ribbon microphones. So you're looking at a microphone does not in and of itself tell you what type of microphone it is. And that's particularly true of condenser microphones. So when you look next, you see the KSM32 there, which is a condenser microphone. That is what's called a large diaphragm condenser microphone there. But there's also very small condenser microphones as well, like lavalier and little tiny earset headset microphones could also be condenser microphones. And then on the end there, you also see a ribbon microphone. That's our KSM 313, just an example of a ribbon mic. Those do tend to look, I wouldn't say they all look the same, but they do all tend to be somewhat larger just because of the nature of the ribbon, which we'll see when we get inside of one in a minute. So starting with dynamic mics, again, most popular mics in the world, and there's several good reasons for that. Dynamic microphones in and of themselves are very rugged. The design of them is very simple. There's not a lot of components inside of them. We'll see what's inside of one in a minute here. But again, a dynamic mic is a very simple device that still sounds really good for being, again, on the more affordable side of things, especially when you compare them to condenser microphones and ribbon microphones. Dynamic mics also tend to be the most affordable. So it's a good balance between sound quality, affordability, and again, also being very rugged. Another nice thing about dynamic microphones is they can handle very loud sounds without distorting. It's nearly impossible to overload a dynamic microphone. So all of that makes them, again, very utilitarian and very useful, but again, with a very high level of sound quality as well. Also, low handling noise is another big one, right? Which is that physical sound you get from touching the microphone. So as I mentioned, they're very simple devices, right? Really, what you look at on the left there, and actually and on the right too, kind of a different side view way of looking at it, right? A dynamic mic just has three components. A diaphragm, which in the case of most dynamics is a very thin layer of mylar with a coil of wire hanging off of it. And then that coil of wire is suspended in a magnetic field, which you see pictured there. Actually, we have an animation that shows us a little better. So when the sound waves strike the diaphragm vibrates back and forth, and that causes the coil to move in the magnetic field. And through the principle of induction, that causes a electric current to be induced in that wire, which also results in a varying voltage. So when you get to the output of a dynamic microphone, that's pretty much all there is to it. The element that you see here with the wires connected to the output connector, possibly maybe a transformer in there, but that's about it. So again, they're very simple devices. They don't require any power in order to operate. They're completely passive devices. Now, when we move into the condenser microphone, now you're getting into something that's a little bit more technologically advanced, let's say. Some of the advantages of a condenser microphone are that they just tend to have more sensitivity, right? That means that they can provide a higher output level given a lower input signal level, right? So they're better for picking up quiet sounds, more nuanced sounds, and also better at picking up at a distance or further away because of that increased sensitivity. They also tend to offer a wider ranging, more natural sound quality, which we'll talk about more when we get into frequency response. But typically, if you're looking for something that has the most natural sound quality, and again, also better at capturing extreme highs and extreme lows that you can't quite get with the dynamic microphone, that's really what you can get with a condenser microphone. But of course, that comes at a cost. Condenser microphones tend to be more expensive. And there's also additional electronics that are required in a condenser microphone that require power in order to operate. A condenser microphone will not work unless you plug it into a mixer or interface or whatever the next device happens to be that provides something called phantom power in order for the condenser microphone to actually do what it's supposed to do, right? And that's, again, I want to talk about common questions that we get on the tech support side here. A very common one is someone buys a condenser microphone and they plug it into their mixer and it's not working, and they call us very annoyed because they spent a lot of money on this expensive condenser mic and it's broken already. It's not that the mic is broken. You just need to make sure that you've enabled that voltage, that what is called phantom power, for that to work. There are a few condenser microphones that will run on a battery as well as phantom power. Those tend to be less and less common these days because most devices that you're going to plug a microphone into typically have phantom power. So, it's not really needed, but that in some cases that is an option. So that's phantom power. Looking at how a condenser microphone works, again, this is sort of a cutaway of the element itself, where you've still got a diaphragm. Again, it's typically also a very thin layer of mylar, but rather than having a coil of wire, which to a sound wave is a heavy thing, it's actually just a very thinly metallic layered diaphragm, typically gold, a very thin layer of gold that is bonded to that mic element. And then there's an electrically charged backplate, a small distance. This is a big blow up here because it's a very tiny air gap. Actually, here we can see a little better here, right? In between the diaphragm and this electrically charged backplate. And essentially what this is doing is forming what in electronics is called a capacitor, right? And really a condenser microphone is a variable capacitor. So as the sound waves strike the diaphragm, it moves back and forth, changing the spacing of that air gap in between the diaphragm and the backplate. And changing that spacing changes the capacitance, which again is able to produce an electrical signal that is representative of the sound wave that was striking the diaphragm. Really, the takeaway here, the key thing to remember is the fact that that diaphragm because it doesn't have to have that massive coiled wire hanging off of it, it's lighter weight. And that lighter weight, or just having less mass in general, is why it's able to be more sensitive and also able to have that higher level of wider ranging sound quality that we get. It's probably important to note that the ability of a microphone to capture low or higher frequency sounds has nothing to do with the physical size of the diaphragm itself. So bigger microphone elements aren't better at picking up low frequency sounds, or vice versa. If it's a really small condenser microphone, that doesn't mean it's any worse at picking up low frequency sounds. And one thing I forgot to mention about dynamic microphones that I think is worth pointing out is their physical size has to be what it is in order to have good sound quality. So a dynamic microphone is the size. They all tend to be somewhat larger because they sort of have to be to sound good. Condenser microphones have no such restriction, which is why most of the tiny lavalier mics and ear set mics that you see being used, especially in theatrical applications, tend to be condenser microphones, because again, they can be that small and they can still sound good. There are large diaphragm condensers as well, but again, they can be whatever size they need to be. This graph is what it's meant to show you, again, is the real difference between how a condenser mic and a dynamic mic responds. So you're looking at basically a spark, which is just a sharp, quick transient that makes the sound that moves the microphone element here, looked at on a scope. And if you look at the top condenser mic, you'll notice that it gets to its sort of peak output much faster than the peak for the dynamic below it does. And then you'll see that the dynamic takes a little bit longer to settle down. That is, after the spark or the transient happens, you still see a little bit of ripple on the tail end of that dynamic microphone there, which is the microphone kind of settling back down to neutral after that initial spark caused it to move. And again, that's one of the reasons that condenser microphones just sound more natural than dynamic microphones do, is because of that transient response. Ribbon microphones, as I mentioned earlier, are just a specialized form of dynamic microphones that actually uses a ribbon. I'm going to go to the cutaway here. It's a little easier to see when you look at the illustrations. Inside of a ribbon microphone, it literally is a ribbon of metal, a very, very thin corrugated ribbon of metal like you see there, suspended in a magnetic field. And so versus a dynamic mic where you've got the mylar diaphragm, and that diaphragm moves the coil of wire that's attached to it. In a ribbon microphone, the ribbon itself is it's metal, and it's also the actual diaphragm that moves in and of itself, right? So it's a little bit simpler design, but they tend to just have a really unique sound quality to them, sort of a darker, to use subjective terms, warmer, richer sound, or whatever that is. Really useful in recording and things like that. Here is, again, more of an animation. Again, you can see the sound wave striking the ribbon which is the diaphragm, and then how you get that voltage coming from it because it's suspended in a magnetic field. Again, specialized, typically known as being somewhat more delicate. People tend to think of ribbon microphones as something you really have to be careful with. And as a general statement, that's true. There's some newer diaphragm technologies like we're using in our KSM ribbon mics that do make them somewhat more rugged. But ribbon mics, especially historical ones, you do have to be much more careful about not blowing on them, not putting them on too loud of a sound source, making sure they don't get hit with phantom power, those sorts of things. Even storing them, you had to make sure you stored them correctly. But again, that's starting to change with some newer ones. But again, more of a specialized dynamic mic. Okay, so let's move into polar patterns now, trying to not belabor the points on these things too much. But this is the second important characteristic, right, which is how a microphone responds to sound coming at it from different directions. And this is, important because it helps you decide based on the environment you're using it in, which type of microphone is important in terms of rejecting unwanted noises, right? And also in terms of placement, making sure you've placed it the right way. You can pretty much break polar patterns down into two general categories, which is omnidirectional, meaning a microphone that picks up sound only from one direction, versus cardioid, or I should say unidirectional, which is a microphone that primarily only picks up sound from one direction. But then, as you see here on this slide, the pattern, the unidirectional patterns come in several different flavors or variations. And it's kind of worth listening to those just to actually hear kind of what the differences are. So I'm going to switch from my SM7 over to an SM58. Here's my SM58 now. Actually, I don't know if you can read this or not. It's 75th anniversary SM58 because I've been working here a very long time. So I have one of these. If you don't know, Shure's coming up on our 95th year in business, actually later in the month of April. So there you go. Anyway, this is my SM58, which is a standard cardioid pattern pickup, right? And it's called cardioid because if you look at the response graph, again, this is directional response. Picture the microphone sort of pointing up, right? So the bottom of that heart, which is where cardioid comes from, right? Cardio, like cardiovascular. It's an upside down heart. And the microphone is pointing up kind of right at the center there. And what that's telling you is that as you move around the microphone, the sound of my voice gets quieter, right? So when I get 90 degrees off, it's significantly quieter than when I'm right in front of the microphone. You're actually about 6 dB down or so. And then the null is at the back of the microphone. So when I talk into the back of the mic, there's very little, if any, pickup. I probably shouldn't do that for too long because you won't hear what I'm trying to tell you, right? But again, this is your typical sort of unidirectional cardioid pickup pattern, right? And it's really useful because it helps you keep the microphone aimed at or focused, although I hate to use that word when talking about sound, but kind of focused on the thing that the microphone is pointing to. So in a noisy environment, in fact, the noisier the environment you're in, the more directional the microphone should be because it will help reject those unwanted or undesired sounds, right? So that's important. But nothing comes for free, right? Cardioid microphones have a side effect, which is called proximity effect. And what that is a increase in bass response as you get closer to the microphone, right? And this is something that it's not designed into it or put there on purpose. It's just a side effect of the physics of what happens when you make a microphone directional. Again, omnidirectionals don't have this effect. I'll try to do a little demonstration here to see if you can actually hear that again with what the codecs and the webinar software does. You may not hear the low end change too much, but as I get closer, I'm going to turn my volume down so you don't perceive the loudness increasing. You just perceive the increase in the low frequency response. So this is with the microphone, my lips basically touching the grill, and you get that increase in bass response. And then if I pull the microphone back and turn up the volume, so you're not hearing too much of a loss there, but you do notice that there's a reduction in that bass response there, and that's proximity effect. And proximity effect is not necessarily a bad thing. Again, one of the reasons that directional mics are good for on-stage vocalists, not just because it doesn't pick up as much of the drums or the too loud guitar players, which Cheryl wouldn't know anything about, but is that is that the increase in bass response also, again, people like that, right? When you get up nice and close like that, you get that kind of warmer, fuller sound, so it can make a somewhat thinner voice like my own sound a little bit beefier than it would in real life. So is it accurate? Not necessarily. Is it good sounding? Yeah, it could be. Okay, so that's a cardioid mic. Now, just for comparison's sake, we'll talk about the supercardioid pattern. So supercardioid, as you see, is even more directional than a cardioid mic is. So as you move around to the sides, you'll get greater off-axis rejection. So bear with me 1 second. I'm going to change from an SM58 to my Beta 58, which is supercardioid. Okay, so now we're back. Now we're with a Beta 58. You'll also notice it sounds a little different, and that has to do with the frequency response of the mic, which is what we're going to talk about next. But again, frequency response, is about how the microphone sounds, right? And the Beta 58 tends to be a little bit brighter or have more high end than an SM58, and it's also a little bit more sensitive. So you might have perceived I got a little bit louder too. But what I really want you to notice is, again, as I move off to the side of the microphone, it really starts to drop off much faster than it does with the cardioid pattern. So I move around to the side, and I'm pretty much out. In fact, the null is sort of right here. The null is not directly at the back of the microphone with a supercardioid. In fact, you can see that on the graph there. There's actually a little tiny pickup area right at the back, directly at the back of the microphone. It's reduced compared to the front end, but it is there. And then again, that's another important thing to keep in mind when you're placing the microphone, because you don't want a loudspeaker blasting right into that. You might get feedback. You don't want to aim that, towards the drum kit necessarily. Kind of want to make sure that's aimed away from it. But again, the main thing is, again, that quicker drop off as you get off to the side. So again, an even louder environment, the louder the stage is, the louder the ambience. Maybe you want a podcast from your coffee shop or something like that, right? You want that more directional microphone so that you get less of that sound around you being picked up. That said, the trade-off here is you really have to make sure that you know how to use a microphone when you go into these more directional types. In other words, as a former sound guy myself, I would always be very leery of giving super cardioid mics out to someone giving a speech or a toast at a wedding if they don't know how to use the mic, because they tend to go like this. And you can see, like with the super cardioid, it's pretty unforgiving when it's not directly in front of my mouth, right? Hopefully you even caught some of that. You can hear how quickly it drops off, right? So with super cardioids, it's even more critical to be right in front of the microphone itself. Okay. Back to the SM7. So again, there's a little bit on polar patterns there, and now we need to talk about frequency response. So frequency response refers to how the microphone sounds. And again, we can look at this in two sort of general buckets, which is flat frequency response versus shaped frequency response. For those of you who haven't seen a chart like this before, basically what you're looking at is the frequency of range of human hearing from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. At least most humans, probably not me anymore, and I imagine probably some of our participants here today too. But a newborn human has a frequency hearing range of 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. On the y-axis is the output level of a microphone, in this case, probably a condenser microphone, that has what's called flat frequency response, and it should be kind of obvious why it's called that. It's a flat line, but what that means is that for whatever frequency you end up putting into the microphone, the output level of the mic is going to be about the same. So this is going to be a very accurate, very neutral sounding microphone that also happens to pick up almost the entire frequency range of human hearing, right? Seems great. And why wouldn't you want this all the time? Well, if you think about it, and we'll see a chart in a minute that illustrates this, not everything that you're trying to mic is capable of reproducing sounds across the entire frequency range. In fact, you might end up getting more unwanted sound than wanted sound, depending on what it is you're trying to pick up. To illustrate this a little better, let's look at what we would consider a shaped frequency response microphone. Again, shaped because now the line has some shape to it. Should be obvious, right? But now you'll notice that at certain frequencies, the output of the microphone is reduced, or there's less sensitivity at certain frequencies, especially on the low and high ends here, and more sensitivity at other frequencies. So the frequency response you're looking at here is actually typical of an SM58. in fact, the flat frequency response that we saw earlier is really not possible to do with a dynamic mic. So when we talked about, again, the differences in how dynamic versus condenser mics sound, you can see that very clearly here that, again, a condenser mic can get that flat frequency response. The dynamic mic can't. That doesn't mean they don't sound good, though, right? Think about how popular the SM58 is and how it's the sound of live vocals for decades, and that's because it turns out that this particular frequency response enhances the voice in a way that makes it useful in a live sound reinforcement application. There's two reasons for that. One is if you look for between like 2,000 and 5,000 hertz, kind of near the right side there, that's what's called a presence peak. And that's where the microphone is more sensitive. The reason this is good, particularly with the human voice, is that's the consonant range. That's the S's, the T's, P's, B's, all the things that allow our communication to be understood. If you think about what whispering is essentially just talking without using vowels. So if you only hear consonants, you can still understand what people are saying. So by having a microphone that automatically is more sensitive in that consonant range, gives you that increased that increased clarity, right? Helps the vocal cut through a busy mix. And then on the bottom end there, below 100 hertz, you'll notice the response of the mic starts to drop pretty dramatically. And that is also useful because most humans don't produce much energy below 100 hertz. Maybe if you're the bass singer in a gospel choir, you might want something that has a little more sensitivity down there. But for most of us, what you're doing is actually allowing the microphone to be less sensitive to vibration, stage vibration, thumping noises, the sound of the drum kit, whatever, all these things that you don't want the microphone to pick up, wind noise, right? This mic is better in those environments because it's less sensitive at the low end and at the high end. Again, above 10K, there are some sibilances and things that are present in the human voice, but they're not essential to communication, which is why that mic rolls it off. Now, again, to give you another comparison point here, again, we need to go dramatic here so that you can actually hear this. We're going to go to an extremely shaped frequency response mic. So right now we're on the SM7, which is similar to what you're seeing here, but a little flatter. It doesn't have quite the same presence peak, which is why for broadcast, people tend to like the SM7. It has that little bit of darker sound quality. Now we'll go to this microphone, the Green Bullet, which is typically used as a harmonica microphone. And you can probably hear why when I'm talking into it. This has a very shaped frequency response. I'm just going to go back to the SM7 because it sounds so much better. I should have had a chart for the harmonica mic, but it's pretty much centered kind of right in the middle there with nothing on the low end, nothing on the high end, but the perfect frequency response for an instrument like a harmonica. So there you go. That's frequency response. The whole crux of the matter when it comes to frequency response is this. You want to match the response of the microphone to the frequencies that the instrument you're miking is capable of reproducing, or voice, I should say, as well. You can kind of see all of those in here. So the black represents the fundamental frequencies that the instrument can produce, and then the gray areas are the harmonic overtones, which are also important because even though that's not a fundamental pitch that the instrument is creating, it's those overtones that give it its characteristic and allow you to know which instrument or voice it is or why different voices sound different. So here again, you just see a random sampling of different instruments and an overlay of a frequency response at the top, right? And you'll notice that instruments like piano, we'll talk more about this specifically in the next section here, but instruments like piano tend to do better with condenser microphones with wide-ranging flat frequency response because pianos and organs are some of the few instruments that actually go that whole range, right? And acoustic instruments in general, which tend to have more harmonics and more, kind of more of their characteristic or personality comes out with those higher harmonics, also do better with microphones that are more natural and capable of achieving those responses. So again, this is this chart, is available in some of our educational booklets on our website and some of our other trainings, and it's a good reference to have when you're trying to compare, again, a microphone's frequency response to what it is that you're actually miking. All that said, Nothing is a substitute for actually listening. Frequency response does not tell you what a microphone sounds like. It only tells you how it responds to different frequencies. To use a food analogy, looking at and reading a recipe really doesn't tell you how something is going to taste. You might be able to look at the ingredients and get some idea as to whether or not that's something you might like, but you don't really know what it tastes like until you eat it. Same thing with frequency response charts. It'll give you an idea of what a microphone sounds like to see if it seems right for your application. There's really no substitute for actually hearing the microphone on the sound source or on your voice. That's, again, a very typical question we get asked here is, which microphone is best for me or for my voice? There's really no way I can tell you that. If I was able to do a live audition with you with several mics and listen to them, I could maybe tell you which one I like best, but that still might not even be the one you like best. So it's a very personal choice. Okay, electrical output. Again, we don't want to turn this into too much of an electronics class here. It's just something that you need to know about because the next device that you're plugging the microphone into needs to know kind of electrically what the microphone is doing. Most microphones that you're going to encounter traditionally are analog devices. Well, actually, they're all analog at some point, but there are newer microphones that have some digital interface built into them, which is good to have when you're connecting a microphone directly to a computer. In the analog world, the three things that we need to think about are the output level of the microphone. How sensitive is it, right? How much sound does it put out for a given input? It's what's called impedance, and the wiring configuration. So the sensitivity, again, is measured in voltage, which is electrical pressure, and it can encounter a range of different voltages depending on the microphone. So in other words, there's no standard output level for a microphone. It's not like all microphones produce this amount of signal level. In general, condenser microphones have higher output level than dynamic microphones do, partially due to the fact that they're more sensitive, but also because of those electronics in there that require phantom power, right? Those are what are called a preamp, right? And that actually can boost the signal level out, but also can cause a wider range in variations and sensitivities. But the reason this is important is you just want to make sure that whatever you're plugging your microphone into is an actual microphone input. So if you've got a mixer that has mic inputs and line inputs, you want to make sure you go into the microphone input because that has enough gain associated with it to work with a microphone level signal. A line input is much higher. It's approximately a volt, right? Versus microphones, which can be millivolts of output. So if you plug a microphone into a line level input, there's just not going to be enough signal level there in order for it to drive it correctly, right? So just make sure microphone goes to mic input, not to line inputs. That's also why you can't really plug a microphone directly into your home stereo system. Again, those are what are called aux or auxiliary level, which is sort of a little bit similar to line level, right? And if you try to, get an adapter cable and plug your microphone right in there, it's not going to work too well. Impedance, which is resistance to alternating current, also comes into play. That's measured in ohms. Most microphones are what's called a low impedance device, which is 150 ohms. Again, if you're plugging a microphone into a mic input, generally with most modern equipment, that's already worked out to be the right impedance. But where this can again get tricky is when you're connecting a microphone to a computer. A lot of microphones do have, a lot of newer computers, most computers have some sort of a analog mic input on them, but those are designed more for consumer mics that are a much higher impedance. And again, if you connect a low impedance professional mic to that high impedance input, it doesn't always work so well. And we'll talk about a better way to get around that in a minute here. In fact, here we're going to go for it right now. When we talk about connecting a microphone to a computer, as I mentioned, most computers have a analog mic in on it. I realize that actually what it's showing here is the headphone jack on this one, which is not a mic input, but they tend to be the same input on consumer type devices. So you don't want to use the analog input on a computer or computer sound card for connecting a microphone. It tends to be noisy, the signal levels don't tend to work out correctly, and your sound quality ultimately suffers, right? The better way to go is through either the USB input or the Thunderbolt input on a computer. or FireWire. If you have an older computer, FireWire tends to be disappearing these days. So it's typically going to be USB or Thunderbolt, right? Now, of course, you can't plug an analog microphone directly in there because that's a digital input, right? It's looking for data. So what you need is a device that provides that data on USB or Thunderbolt. So there are two ways to go about this. You can either use a signal adapter, like what you see on the left there. It's the Shure MVI, and that's a device that takes an analog mic input and converts it to actually a USB output for a computer, or you can go lightning into an Apple iOS device or to an Android device through the micro USB. There are a couple different options there, but the point is it takes that analog mic signal through its XLR and then processes it and delivers the digital signal that a computer can deal with. So now all of the processing and everything is optimized for a professional microphone, but it gives the output that's going to make a computer happy. On the right, you see what's referred to as a USB microphone or a digital microphone, right? It's actually a regular old, analog mic inside of there, along with the electronics that are inside of something like an MVI. So that's a mic that you can, again, plug directly to USB on your computer or to your mobile device and get that happening easily, right? Much better than trying to go into an analog input on any of these modern mobile devices or computer devices, if possible. So that's a good way to go. That works if you are only connecting one device, a single microphone. If you have more than one microphone, then you want to get an external interface, of which these are just two examples, one Thunderbolt interface, one USB interface, but these are audio recording interfaces that have multiple XLR microphone inputs on them. Typically want to make sure you have something that has phantom power. And this allows you to, again, get multiple mics going at the same time into your computer. Let's spin through a couple applications quickly here. I realize I'm running along like I always do, and this person looks familiar to me. So I can't ever take this picture out of the presentation. So first of all, we're going to talk about voice, and not all voices are created equal because it depends on if you're singing or speaking or podcasting or whatever you're doing. There's going to be different choices here, right? So just kind of looking at what we've learned so far, either dynamic or condenser microphones could work for single vocalists doing singing here. And it really depends more on the sound quality that you're looking for and the sensitivity, right? If you're looking for something that is a little more nuanced and has a little bit brighter, higher end frequency response, maybe a condenser. If you want something that's a little more durable, that can handle higher sound pressure levels, maybe you want, for a louder singer, maybe you want to go with the dynamic. But either one will work for solo vocal applications. When it comes to pickup patterns, you typically don't want to use omnidirectional here because omnidirectional is just going to, pick up all the sounds of that loud band that is surrounding you, right? So you go with a cardioid or a supercardioid, again, depending on, a lot of times, the singer's knowledge of how to use a microphone, as well as where the loudspeakers are going to be placed in terms of minimizing loudspeaker pickup for feedback. That's what you kind of want to look at there when you're looking at that. Typically, again, that shaped frequency response that is really kind of optimized more for the human voice rather than a flat frequency response that's going to pick up everything. That said, if you're miking an ensemble like a choir, you do typically want flatter frequency response because now you're not getting that up close sound. You're trying to get the sound of the ensemble itself. And a choir is very similar to an orchestra or anything, any ensemble, whether it's a choir, an orchestra, a concert band, whatever it happens to be. You typically do want to use those condenser microphones that are more sensitive so they can be placed further away. And again, they have that flatter, more natural frequency response, which works well. Dynamic microphones are not good for distant choir miking. And that's, again, another common call we might get on the applications engineering side of things here at Shure is, I'm trying to mic my choir with these SM58s and they're just not picking up that well from 3 feet away. It's like, well, yeah, they're kind of not really designed for that. Again, dynamic mics are pretty low sensitivity, which means that you really do need to get on them pretty close. In fact, you'll notice like I've been pretty close to my SM7 most of the time here. And that's because it just works that much better, right? If I move further away, you can still hear me Probably, but I'm shouting now just because I realize that I'm quieter, right? So the microphone just tends to work better, dynamic mics in particular, when you're close to them. Now I could try and compensate for that by adding more gain, turning my mixer up, but in a live sound reinforcement situation, the more I have to turn my mixer up, the more likely I'm going to get feedback, right? So you really kind of want to stick with the condenser mics for these applications. And again, unidirectional, probably cardioid tends to work the best for this. Again, you don't want omnidirectional mics because if you're miking a choir, you're often hanging a microphone down from the ceiling. Omni doesn't help you because it's picking up sound that's bouncing off the ceiling, which is probably going to sound worse instead of better. A hot topic these last couple weeks, given again how everyone's life has changed, is choosing a microphone for a home conferencing application. I think we're all getting used to having meetings via Microsoft Teams or Skype or BlueJeans or Zoom or what have you, right? And this is the perfect application for a USB type microphone, right? You can certainly use the microphone that is built into your computer and the intelligibility is there. But it doesn't, it doesn't have the same clarity and the same naturalness. And if you're like me, spending almost all day on web conferences, it can get pretty much fatiguing listening to bad sounding microphones, right? In fact, actually, that's something I think we can even demo here. Let me see. If I bring up my GoToWebinar control panel, I actually should be able to switch from my SM7 microphone to the built-in microphone on the computer. Let's try that and see what happens. Okay, so now you're hearing my voice through the built-in microphone on my Lenovo ThinkPad. Again, the codec has some effect on it here, but hopefully you can, I can't hear it anymore because it doesn't come through my headphones, but hopefully you can hear a difference there, get some idea of how that might change. Okay, let's actually go.
Oh. Gino, I think we lost you.
I accident. Am I back?
You're back.
All right. Okay, yeah. I accidentally switched to phone call instead of computer audio. If you really want to hear a lousy sound, yeah, dial in from your cell phone and see how good that sounds, right? So again, having a good mic for these applications is really worthwhile. They typically also have headphone jacks on them, which is nice because you can have your headphones plugged right into the microphone so you can hear yourself a little bit, but you hear the far end coming through your headphones, and it just gives a much better overall experience. It actually minimizes echo as well. You've probably all been on conference calls where you're speaking and you start to hear yourself speaking back, right? Well, that can happen to the person on the far end if you're not using headphones, right? If you use headphones connected instead of the loudspeakers built into the computer, then you minimize that echo. And if everybody's doing this, then you have a phone call with no echo, which is great. In fact, we have a page set up on our website now. You go to shure.com/home office, and you can learn all about the applications we have for some of these products that can be used for your home sort of meeting environment. Podcasting is very similar, right? Again, you're still trying to get the microphone into the computer, right? At some point, which is why I chose to have the MVI pictured here, which is the interface that can, again, accept any pro microphone and adapt it directly to the computer's USB, or again, to an iOS device or to an Android device directly without even having to go to the computer first. So if you like to produce your podcast entirely on your mobile device, you can do that with an interface like this. Would the microphone we talked about previously with the built-in USB work? Absolutely. And that's a great microphone. But a lot of podcasters really want to sound like the guy in the picture does here, which is that, again, you get your lips right on the microphone and you get all that proximity effect from your SM7. And there you go. Like you've got that, again, that more, I guess I call it that FM radio DJ sound that a lot of professional podcasters are looking for. And that's what you get right here. If any of you have ever listened to Mark Maron's WTF podcast, for example, if you find pictures from behind the scenes on that, you'll see SM7s in there, right? So that's an example of what a really good mic can do for you when it comes to podcasting. So again, it's that dynamic microphone sound of the SM7 that is what makes it a good choice for this. Again, you could use condenser mics as well, particularly maybe a large diaphragm condenser. But again, and that unidirectional pickup pattern is what you're really going for here. But I can't stress enough: do not try to connect an SM7 directly to the built-in mic input on your computer. You will be most unhappy. When we were talking about sensitivity earlier, even dynamic mics can vary in terms of their output sensitivity. So again, most dynamic mics tend to be very low. The SM7 is really low. And for those of you who are considering it, the interface that you choose to use to get it into your computer is critical, because you need to make sure it has enough gain to get it up to a signal level that's going to make the computer input happy, right? For example, my SM7 is plugged into an analog mixer with a USB output. And the gain control on the mixer I have turned up to its maximum setting, which is plus 60. You typically need about 60 dB of gain for an SM7 to work well. If you go into an inexpensive interface that only has 40 dB of gain, the SM7 is not going to be happy. So that's why we talk about things like sensitivity, right? Earlier, I know that people tend to glaze over when you get into some of that electronics stuff, the physics part of it, but that's where it matters, because again, we get the call of like, this SM7, it's not loud enough. Well, the SM7's output is what it is, but the next device in the chain, you just need to make sure it's able to deal with something like that.
Hey, Gino, just to tack on to that too, I'd like to say, if you do have an existing interface that doesn't give you enough gain, there are some preamplifiers on the market that are fairly affordable that you can use to add an additional gain. So if you do have an existing preamp that isn't going to provide enough gain, there are interfaces available to give you an extra bit of juice to use with the equipment you already have.
Absolutely. Those are very popular these days. Some dealers even sell that in a bundle. You can get the SM57 along with whatever preamp they happen to be packaging, so that you'll get good results. Mobile content creation. Now, again, there are several different ways to approach this, but again, we're typically talking about needing to connect a microphone directly into the mobile device itself, right? And there's a couple of different options here. You see pictured on the left the MV88 Plus, and on the right in the top photo is the MV88, along with the Shure Motive video app pictured on the bottom there, right? These are both microphones that, again, are designed specifically with the correct interface to go directly into your mobile device. Much, much better, again, than trying to adapt an analog mic into, well, if you have a mobile device that even still has an analog mic input on it, microphone input on it. I mean, if you have anything from an Apple device from iPhone 7s onward, they took those jacks off of there. So you really have no choice but to go in through the lightning connector on those. These mics are nice because they're very versatile. They're both stereo microphones. The main difference is that the older version, the MV88 shown on the right there, has a lightning connector only on it and is meant to plug directly into an iOS device. So it only works with iOS. Whereas the MV88 Plus has a lot more flexibility. Plus, as you can see, it's a kit that comes with a neat little stand and tripod stand and or hand grip and a mount that grips it directly to the phone. So between the camera built into the phone and a microphone like this, you get really top tier audio quality. Again, much better than using the microphone built into the phone with a device that can plug directly into it. We're kind of running low on time. I don't want to spend too much time on all of these different applications. We're just going to kind of spin through, some mic choices for other things here. So when we're looking at electric guitar, again, dynamic or condenser, the SM57 tends to be very popular for that. And then again, it just depends on really here on the sound quality that you're looking for. Acoustic guitar tends to be more for condenser microphones, because again, the subtleties and nuance of an acoustic instrument just tend to do better or are reproduced better by a directional condenser microphone, large or small diaphragm. Grand piano, again, very similar. We're talking about condenser microphones that are going to be able to capture that wide-ranging sound of the piano itself. Could you use a dynamic? Sure, but if you've got a nice sounding piano, you don't want to cheat it by not capturing everything that it's capable of, and that's where the condenser mics tend to work better here. And drums is a whole nother can of worm. I will refer you to the educational publication we have, which is about microphone techniques for drums, where you can see all the different applications. Apologize, but I do want to make sure. Well, I'll ask Cheryl, how's the Q&A looking at this point? Do we have some questions we need to get to?
We do have a lot of questions. I can go over, if you can go over, Gino, and I know our participants might not be able to stay, but if we do go along with all of these questions, we will make sure they are included in the archived webinar recording.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. Because I did want to go through this, right? I did want to get to a little bit of microphone mythbusters here, because there just tends to be so much misinformation that gets to be spread, or just misconceptions that there are about microphones and how they work or what they can do. So we'll go to these quickly, and then this might take care of some of the Q&A, I'm guessing. But the number one thing that we want to debunk is the myth of microphone reach. The idea that certain microphones are better at going out and picking up sounds that are further away than other microphones are. Microphones do not have reach. A microphone it's a measurement device, and it can only pick up what comes at it. Right. Another way to think of it is, if you can't hear the sound with your own ears, then the microphone can't hear it either. Or vice versa. If you can hear it, the microphone can also hear it. Sometimes people want microphones that, like, only pick up one thing and not another thing. But again, if you can hear it, the microphone can hear it. Directional mics can help with that. And that's where the myth of mic reach mostly comes from, is the fact that a directional microphone, because it is less sensitive to sound that is off axis from the front of the microphone, can be placed further away and still pick up sound, right? And it minimizes the background noise. But at a certain point, there can be so much background noise that it doesn't matter how directional the mic is. In fact, we can demo this right here. Again, if I move further away from this microphone, you can still hear me, particularly if I turn it up, right? I compensate by adding more gain at my mixer. You can still hear me. But if you're in a high ambient background noise area, so I'm using my phone to simulate a train station, right? You can hear a lot less of me because the train's in the way, right? If I get closer to the microphone, though, now you can hear me again. So it's not that the microphone has any better reach or anything like that. It's just that now I'm louder than the background noise. But if I move far enough away, right, then you don't get me. Then you just get the background noise. So again, a microphone doesn't reach out and grab sound. It's always good to be as close to the microphone as you can. Another question, which microphone doesn't cause feedback? Well, the microphone doesn't cause feedback, right? Feedback is not caused by the microphone itself. Feedback is a phenomenon that occurs when sound goes into a microphone, goes through the sound system, and comes out the loudspeaker, and is picked up by the microphone again, causing a loop, right? So, you can unplug the microphone and your feedback goes away, but you can also unplug the loudspeaker and your feedback goes away because you've broken the loop. So again, there's nothing about a microphone inherently that causes or does not cause feedback. That said, omnidirectional microphones might be more susceptible to feedback because they pick up sound from all direction, which means they're more likely to pick up a loudspeaker than a directional microphone does and get you that feedback. Whereas a unidirectional cardioid or supercardioid can be aimed away from the loudspeaker, minimizing the amount of that speaker that's picked up and minimizing the chances of getting a feedback loop. But the single best way to avoid feedback is to be as close to the microphone as possible. Because the closer I am to the microphone, the less gain I need to add. And the less gain I need to add, the less likely the microphone is to pick up that sound from the loudspeaker. So the single best way, even with an omnidirectional mic, is to be really close to the microphone, and then you'll get less feedback. And that's why in theater applications, you can use omnidirectional microphones like they use, taped to the performer's cheek or their forehead, up in the wig, or anywhere else like that. Because you probably heard my phone beep there, speaking of ambient noise. With an omnidirectional microphone, when it's that close to your mouth, right at the side of your cheek, then it doesn't matter what the ambient sound level is like, because your voice is going to be so much louder. So you do see omni mics used in theater a lot, specifically for that. Another myth, condenser mics should never be used on the stage, only in the studio, because they have those electronics and they're so sensitive and you might break them. Historically, that was true. The early days of condenser mics, particularly when the electronics were tube preamps, back up through probably the 60s, even into the 70s, that was true. starting with the Shure SM81 that came out in 1979. And ever since then, we have designed good quality, rugged electret microphones that can actually be used on stage. In fact, the Beta 87 and KSM9 from Shure are handheld vocal microphones that were designed specifically for the stage. They go through the same drop tests everything else does. So again, I wouldn't say that maybe 100% for all condenser microphones are stage worthy, but many, in fact, probably most are. Phantom power might damage dynamic mics. Again, this is not true. If you need to turn on phantom power to power a condenser mic and your mixer has one switch that turns on phantom for all channels, you can still plug in your dynamic mics. There's no issue there. My voice is so loud when I sing that I can even overload a dynamic microphone. Again, this is not possible. We talked earlier about how dynamic microphones can handle very high sound pressure levels. To distort a dynamic microphone, you would pretty much have to be miking the space shuttle taking off. You need to create like around 174 dB SPL to distort a dynamic mic. Once you get up to around 120 dB SPL, you're already at the threshold of pain. And again, there's no human voice in the world that can generate as much sound as a space shuttle taking off. If you are hearing distortion, what you're probably hearing is the actual mic preamp itself overloading, right? So you're actually putting so much signal into the mixer that the mixer has too much gain, and you can usually fix that by patting down the mixer input or turning the gain down, but it's not the microphone. And just kind of a Shure specific one here, SM57s and SM58s are two totally different microphones. SM57 is for instruments and SM58 is for vocals. Well, I hate to burst people's bubbles, but they're actually the same microphone. The SM58 just happened to have a ball grill on it, which makes it better for vocals because the ball grill provides an extra layer of pop protection, the P and T plosives, and is better at reducing wind noise. The SM57 doesn't have that, which makes it better for instruments. You can get in a little bit closer on it. But if you were to take the grills off, they're actually the same thing underneath. Here's some resources you can find on our website, and as well as a couple additional books that are good for additional reading. John Ergel's microphone book is a classic. The Yamaha sound reinforcement book also has a lot of good information for us. You can find more mic spec videos on our YouTube channel. If you go to our website under shure.com/training and click on educational publications, there's several good mic technique books there. And I'll stop talking and let Cheryl feed me some questions.
Great. Lots of good information, Gino. And we have lots of great questions. So we're going to try and get through all of these. I know we're running a little long, so if you have to jump off, don't worry. We'll make sure that the questions are included in the recorded version, just to reiterate. All right. So the first question I have here is, do different microphones vary in cost based on what they're made for, i.e. streaming versus singing versus studio microphones?
There are several things that go into, why a microphone costs what it does. Again, sometimes it's just the technology of the transducer itself. Again, dynamics are just simpler and they're cheaper to make, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're worse for a particular application. We have a kind of a running joke on the tech support side here when people say, what's your best microphone? Well, our joke answer is always KSM 353 because it's the most expensive, right? But that's not necessarily true. Again, it's all about what microphone sounds right for the application. And so you design a microphone to sound a certain way so that it works well for what it needs to do. And in some cases, if that ends up being more expensive, that might be the case. But sometimes not. Again, SM58, one of the reasons it's so popular is not only because it is a great sounding mic for vocal applications, live vocal applications, but also because it's been like $100 for years. And that's like a value that you can't, if you want to use the same guitar that, let's date myself, but Jimmy Page uses or whatever, right? That's going to cut those Les Pauls are going to cost you an arm and a leg, right? But if you want to use the same microphone Roger Daltrey does with the Who, the SM58, go down to your local music store and buy one for $100 or buy one on our website or wherever. They're all the same. They're all $100, and it's the same thing that Roger Daltrey uses. So no, I mean, again, yes, you do kind of get what you pay for. I wouldn't say that every microphone is equal, including the ones you can find for $10 on Wish.com or whatever. But if it's from a reputable manufacturer, then if it's right for you and it sounds right for you and it fits your application, then don't worry about the cost.
There you go. All right, next question. Can ribbon and condenser microphones be able to be connected to a karaoke system or amplifier?
The biggest, well, okay, take that in two sections. The first thing is for condenser microphones, it has to have phantom power. And I'm not familiar enough with karaoke machines to know if they do. But if they do, then yes, you can use a condenser microphone. Ribbon microphones, if you wanted to use one of those in a karaoke application, well, again, it depends on the ribbon mics. The Shure ribbon mics, like our KSM 313 and 353, can actually be okay connected to a mixer that has phantom power turned on, but some more vintage ones can't. So that really depends on the ribbon mic itself as to whether or not that is an okay thing to do. If you're only using ribbon mics and don't have to worry about phantom power, then you can probably get away with it, assuming, sorry, there's a lot of assumptions here, but again, we talk about something like a karaoke mixer, assuming the karaoke machine has enough gain for what is typically very low output that you would get from a ribbon mic. I would say submit your question to our tech support team if you have some more specifics on your karaoke machine, and we might be able to give you a more solid answer on that.
And you can reach that support team by visiting shure.com/contact. There's a form that you can fill out there to open up a ticket with them and log your questions there too. Okay, next question. Gino, this is specifically to you when you were switching between mics. Why is your dynamic mic not squealing loud when it's near another microphone?
Well, that comes back to the feedback question again. Again, feedback is not inherent in microphones, right? So getting two microphones closer together is not going to make them feedback. Feedback occurs when you, again, the microphone comes out of the loudspeaker and is picked up by the microphone. And I did that earlier because when I was setting up for the webinar and about gave my dog a heart attack because I had forgotten to unplug my studio monitors, which is very close to this microphone. And I had it gained up appropriately for the webinar. And when I unmuted the mic, the dog jumped through the ceiling of the house. So through the roof. So again, if I were to plug those back in, you would hear massive feedback. But moving mics close together, even if I turn them both on, you're not going to get feedback. Now I got louder because there's two mics picking me up, and you can get into some weird comb filtering things as I move back and forth between the two microphones.
Just going to mention comb filtering. Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of a weird thing, but again, not going to cause feedback.
Great. All right. When you were demonstrating the supercardioid, polar pattern, why did the mic sound so muffled from the back when you were in the null?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So, the frequency response of a directional microphone is not uniform at all frequencies as you move around the microphone. So when I'm talking into the back of the microphone, actually, a lot of the high frequencies, so back up. So when you get higher in frequency wavelengths, the actual physical size of the wave gets shorter, which means they're more likely to be blocked by solid objects, right? So when I'm talking into the back of the microphone, even though there's a little bit of pickup happening there, most of the high frequencies is actually being blocked and not getting around to the front of the microphone. So again, you don't have that consistency. Even off to the side, the response does start to change. So you will always find a change in frequency response as you move around the microphone itself. And the mic is designed to sound good this way. You don't really care how good it sounds at the back because you're not supposed to be using that side anyway. I was just going for demonstration purposes.
Perfect. All right. Can you speak to what sort of design elements help determine the pickup pattern of a microphone?
That's a great question because it leads to another really good point. So contrary to what most people understand, an omnidirectional microphone, one that picks up sound from all directions, is completely sealed around the back of the microphone. There actually is no way for sound to enter the microphone from the back. What happens is, pretend this is an omnidirectional mic. If I'm speaking into the back of it, the sound wave moves past the microphone, but the variation in air pressure still happens on this side of the mic, which again still forces that diaphragm to move back and forth, even though I'm behind the microphone. So how a unidirectional microphone works from a design perspective is there's actually little ports or openings behind the microphone that let sound enter from the back and the front. And so when the same sound, the same wave hits the back of the diaphragm and the front of the diaphragm doesn't move. And if the diaphragm doesn't move, there's no sound, right? So from a design perspective, that's what ends up, that's how you create a directional pattern, is by opening up these ports behind the mic element itself, which is why, and I'm sure Cheryl knows where I'm going with this. I'll switch back to the Beta 58, which is why it's bad to hold a microphone like this, right? You'll notice I got louder, but the sound of the microphone also changed. But not only that, I actually made the microphone more into kind of a bad omni by closing up the ports at the back. So you actually end up getting less drop off as I move off to the side of the microphone now, because I've essentially made it a bad sounding omnidirectional microphone when I cup it like this. Or as one of our other presenters has in their mic presentation, right? This is not a handle. This is a handle, right? This might look cool, but it makes your microphone kind of sound like that. And again, so it changes the frequency response, changes the polar pattern when you cover up those ports on the back of the microphone. So good question.
Great. All right, this next one's kind of an application-specific one. I have a female drummer who also sings lead. Nice. That is a tough job. My hat's off to that lady. She uses a Shure PGX-D4 wireless with a PG30 headset. She's very short. She's 4'11", so she's very close to the kit. Can you make any recommendations on a headset mic, or how we can set this up to avoid so much of the bleed from the kit?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Because drums, especially snare drums, are inherently loud. And when you're a singing drummer, the microphone is going to be close to the drum kit. The PG30 is a cardioid pattern mic, which is good. So it's going to reject some of that drum sound, not all of it, not 100%, obviously, right? Two thoughts. One, you could try going to a headset mic with a super cardioid pattern, which is going to be a little bit tighter. However, that often, that little bit of extra pickup you get at the back sometimes makes it worse. It kind of depends on where her drums are in relation to the microphone, but it's a possibility. The other thing you can do practically is, again, I'm not seeing how she wears it or where she normally positions the mic. You just want that mic to be as close to the mouth as possible. So if you can manipulate that boom so that it's not out here, but kind of just get it in as tight as possible, that's going to allow her voice to be louder than the drums to a certain extent. And that's, if that doesn't work, you might just think about maybe going to a dynamic mic on a stand. I see a lot of drummers use the Beta 56, which is a super cardioid pattern, very similar to a Beta 58 that you can have kind of come down over the top, sort of right in here, and then push it out of the way when you don't need it. So in the long run, that might end up being how you have to go.
Nice. Good suggestion. Okay, next question. In terms of working with large diaphragm mics versus small diaphragm mics, what is the difference in terms of tonality between the two? I know mass is a factor, and a smaller diaphragm condenser mics have better transient response, but is there anything else to consider?
Actually, it was funny. There was a slide in the presentation that I hit it just for sake of time and not wanting to get too deep in the weeds. But that is a question that does come up, as large versus small diaphragm condenser elements. And you mentioned a good point, right? Which is that, there tends to be a misconception that larger diaphragm mics are better, or they sound better somehow for some reason, right? And it's not that they sound better, but they just do have a different tonal characteristic to them typically that people tend to like, right? It gets into that whole subjective sound quality thing again, right? And in truth, the smaller diaphragm condenser microphones tend to be actually more natural and more accurate, because it's actually easier to control the response of that diaphragm when it's that much smaller. Also, the off-axis response, again, there was a question earlier about why does a Beta 58 sound different when you move around it, right? That off-axis response is actually also more consistent with the smaller diaphragm condenser microphones versus the large diaphragm ones. Again, the larger diaphragm ones, they have more off-axis coloration to the sound quality. They can also be somewhat again, they don't have the same transient response that the smaller one does. However, they do tend to have lower self noise. So all condenser microphones have an inherent kind of noise floor to them, a little hissing that is always present. It's very, very low on almost all modern condenser microphones, but large diaphragm do offer the advantage of lower self noise. Like the KSM44A is like 7 dBA weighted, which is pretty much you can't perceive it, right? So really low self noise, and again, a just kind of I don't know. Again, people would describe it as a warmer or a more full bodied or richer tone or whatever you want to call it. Which again, it's just due to that larger surface area that you get on the large diaphragm condenser.
Great. Okay. So if I'm trying to capture a snare drum, which mic would have less bleed from the other drum components, the SM57 or Beta 57, and why?
Typically, I would say the Beta 57 because of that supercardioid pattern. So I did kind of gloss over the drum miking section, but it's typically going to be cardioid or supercardioid. And again, the more mics you have on the drum kit and the closer they are together, the more directional you want to be. So whether it's snare or toms or whatever, the supercardioid is definitely going to pick up less of the other drums.
Great. Okay. I'm not sure what this next person is asking, so I'm just going to present it to you in case you understand it.
Okay.
Can we use harmonic microphones in string instruments? I'm not familiar with harmonic microphones.
Unless they meant harmonica microphones.
Maybe.
Like the Green Bullet, which probably wouldn't make a very good instrument for strings.
I think it depends on what kind of sound you're going for.
Yeah, I guess. But if they truly meant harmonic and that wasn't a typo, not quite sure either.
All right. Please visit shure.com/contact, fill out that form, and you can get in touch with the support team, and they can maybe talk you through that a little bit more and figure out, the answer to your question. All right. Next question is about connecting to computers. What is FireWire and how does it work?
A FireWire it's kind of, I guess, to not get again too deep in the weeds, it's just like USB or Thunderbolt. It's just another method of moving digital bits from devices to devices or getting other things into your computer. So it does the same thing as a USB or a Thunderbolt interface does in terms of audio, right? Where it takes the microphone analog mic signal or audio signal, converts it to digital, and again allows you to connect to the computer. Back in the early days of USB 1 particularly, FireWire was much faster. So you could push a lot more data into your computer. So in the early days, the multi-channel interfaces that allowed you to plug 4 or 8 microphones and get that all into your computer at the same time, those are almost exclusively FireWire. But now with USB 2 and USB 3, USB has gotten much faster. And so you're really starting to see the decline of FireWire interfaces now. They're definitely being supplanted by either USB 3 or Thunderbolt.
Great. All right. I'm going to take this next question. All right. It is, I have a MacBook and I don't have a normal USB input. What can I use? I can answer this question because I have a MacBook too, and I think I understand what you're asking. The newer MacBooks have converted to the USB-C platform for almost all of their input ports. As a matter of fact, I have my personal MacBook has a single USB-C port, so that's super fun. There are a couple of ways that you can get around that. The simplest way is I have a very simple USB-C to USB adapter, and it works great. I'm actually using that right now. I have my KSM8, which I'm speaking into, plugged into my MVI, plugged into my USB interface, plugged into my USB-C input on my MacBook. So that is one option. Mine is just a very simple, I think it's an Anker USB adapter. And I think it's got several ports just to give me some options. So that's option one. Option number two, which is also something that I've done, which is the MV88 Plus. So that is the iOS and USB-C microphone. So the MV88 Plus comes with a USB-C cable along with a lightning cable. So you can plug it directly into your USB-C MacBook. And I have done that with mine as well. The only caveat to that is to make any microphone setting adjustments, you would need to have an iOS device because you'd need to access the Shure Plus Motive apps to make those changes. So those are two options right there. All right.
Cool.
Next question. Oh, this is a question for you, Gino. Why did you choose the SM7B over the SM58 for this webinar? I know why.
Because it's awesome.
You can't really hear it, once again, as Gino mentioned with the compression. But there is something super magical when you hear your voice on an SM7B. It just sounds so much more buttery and smooth. It's nice. If you haven't tried it, find a
Yeah.
dealer that's got one you can set up and demo, because it's something. I really want one.
Yeah. It really, I mean, it again, it's a sound, it's a personal sound quality choice. But I'll say this, not to plug the SM7 or whatever, but like every time I record a singer, I put up several different mics, usually a condenser, one of the KSM condenser mics, and a ribbon mic, and the SM7. And I always end up coming back to the SM7, even though, back to the earlier point, it's cheaper than any of those other options, right? It's not the most expensive, but it just it is one of those things that it just has that characteristic to it, that people like. And I like to use mine too, because I don't know if you can see the old logo on there. This is actually an original SM7, not an
Ooh.
SM7B.
Wow. And the
Which is not all of the different, I mean, the SM7B comes with this bulbous windscreen. The original SM7 has the thinner one, and the B comes with both. Other than that, it's pretty much unchanged.
And the collectors go wild. Alrighty. A couple of choir questions here. What's better for a choir, a ribbon or a condenser microphone?
Condenser, definitely. Ribbons are not, again, just like a dynamic mic, ribbons are not really sensitive enough to work well from the distance to mic a choir.
Great. And then for voice choir, which condenser microphones would you suggest?
Okay, getting into something Shure specific, it really depends. One of the primary things that it depends on is how you're going to mount the microphone, right? A lot of choirs really don't want mic stands out in front. They want to hang something down from the ceiling. And if you're going to do that, I would look at our Microflex series, the MX202 microphone, which is a really low profile condenser mic that is small and designed to be hung from the ceiling. It's available in black or white, so it can really match the aesthetic. If the aesthetic is not a consideration and you'd like to upgrade something that sounds a little bit more studio quality, I tend to really like our KSM series. The KSM 137, for example, is a really great, still somewhat low profile, but meant to be stand mounted condenser microphone, cardioid pattern. And again, it's going to give you a little bit more studio quality sound. There are others that might work. I'm sure you can find them on our website. I think we have a application page for House of Worship where you could find some of that. But those are two that come to mind for me.
Great. Okay, next question. What polar pattern is recommended for someone wearing a lavalier microphone?
So again, you're going to find me saying a lot now. It depends. Because lavalier mics are used in many different applications, right? If we're talking about theater, which I mentioned earlier, it's almost always going to be some sort of omnidirectional mic, simply because the best place to put an omnidirectional mic is on axis with your mouth, sort of, right here pointing up, right? But in theater, you don't always have that option. It could be, again, in your hairline up here, right? Or on your cheek or something like that, or somewhere odd, and buried in your costume. So omnidirectional for theater, for sure. And as a general rule, if Omni is available to you in other applications like broadcast, for example, or public speaking, it's good to use because, again, if the mic's a little off axis or someone puts it on upside down or whatever, it doesn't matter as much. When you get into using directional, like a cardioid pattern lavalier microphone, you do have to make sure that it's pretty much dead center on your chest, pointed directly up at your mouth, or else it doesn't pick you up very well. The reason that you might have to use a directional mic, though, is in those public address or public speaking applications where there are loudspeakers involved, you may be more likely to get feedback from an omnidirectional lav than you would with a cardioid pattern lav. But what I tend to recommend for those applications, and you're seeing it more and more, and it's what I use when I do live classes, is the ear set microphones. It just comes over one ear, very low profile, very lightweight. You hardly notice you're wearing it. Those are Omni, so they don't have that weird proximity effect of being when it's close to your mouth, and you get much better gain before feedback. And again, you don't have those issues. Again, you put a cardioid lavalier mic, even if you've got it, pretend this is a lavalier mic right here, right? Even if you've got it here, well, actually here. I'll demonstrate that again, switching back to this. Pretend it's a lavalier mic, even though it's not. When I turn my head that way, well, you probably heard it. You don't hear me as much when I turn that way, right? And the same thing will happen with a lavalier mic. So, but the headset mic, pretend this is a headset mic. It doesn't matter which way I turn my head. The microphone always stays in the same place. So I'd say go with an omnidirectional lav mic if you can. If you can't, think about going to an ear set mic.
Great. All right. I really like this next question. Is proximity effect good or bad?
And the answer is...
It depends.
It depends. Again, it's just something you have to know is there and then know how to deal with it. And if you think it's bad, and here's a plug for the mic that Cheryl is using right now, the KSM8, some microphones do have less proximity effect than others do, which means that, again, as I move back and forth between closer and further from the mic, the low frequency response doesn't change, which is good for consistency. If you do have, again, someone who's using the mic that isn't good about maintaining consistent position, and proximity effect is a bad thing because the low frequency response keeps changing. But it's a good thing, again, if you want to get nice and close to your SM7 and get that warm radio DJ sound. So, it's neither good nor bad. It just is.
I'm going to expand on that just a little bit because somebody else had asked us to touch base on the KSM8 and proximity effect. So yeah, the KSM8, which is this silver mic that I'm using right now, and somebody said it sounds fantastic. And yes, it does. If you're a singer and you have an opportunity to try a KSM8, you might like it. I haven't met a singer yet who, well, there might be a few, but most singers generally gravitate towards this microphone. But anyway, KSM8 is a dual diaphragm microphone, and the second diaphragm is a passive diaphragm that helps roll off proximity effect. And Gino could talk more about the specifics about that. But one other thing about the KSM8 that's so nice and where proximity effect becomes a bad thing is microphone bleed. So I am in a couple of bands that are very loud with some very loud guitar players who have pointy guitars that they might hang on their wall behind them. Anyway, when you're playing with a really loud band and you're using like in-ear monitors, sometimes that bleed can be very, very harsh. And, the nice thing about the KSM8 and that rolled off proximity effect is that it makes the bleed very, very natural. So obviously you're going to get bleed on loud stage. Even if you're using a super tight polar pattern, you're going to get bleed. It's just going to happen. But with that rolled off proximity effect, the bleed is natural. So cymbals sound like cymbals. They don't have that extra harsh sound, and guitars, there's just not that extra harshness that is brought into your sound. So that's another plug for the KSM8 and why its rolled off proximity effect is so nice for performers. So, all right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I don't know much, but what I do know, I know it well. All right. Next question about miking pianos. Could you talk a little bit about where the best placement for miking pianos might be?
Sure. Actually, let me see if I can go back to the slide here where we were seeing that. Whoop, there it was, right? So, well, again, I should ask, although you may not be able to clarify it quickly enough, so I'll cover both. Are we talking about live sound or are we talking about recording, right? Because if you think about it, with a piano, or really with any instrument, but particularly a piano, right? The sound of the piano, where most people are used to hearing it, is not with your head inside the piano, which is kind of where you see the mics pictured here, right? The piano, kind of, a general rule of thumb for miking any instrument, actually, is acoustic instrument, is the instrument sounds most natural at a distance equivalent to about the size of the instrument itself. So if someone's playing a 9-foot grand piano, the instrument sounds best about 9 feet away from it, right? Probably with the, on the high stick, right? So if you're recording, right, that's a great place to mic the piano from, about 9 feet away or so, give or take. That also assumes you're in an acoustically good room, right? Either something with a nice natural reverb, or maybe just a dead room if you don't want the room to influence the sound at all, right? If you're in a noisy gymnasium, it's going to sound terrible from 9 feet away, right? So again, that's why everything is always a rule of thumb, right? But again, typically for recording, you're going to put the stick up and you're going to kind of, try to be some feet away or some small distance away from the piano itself. In a live sound reinforcement scenario, that doesn't work because you're either going to get feedback from the sound coming out of the loudspeakers, or you're going to pick up all the instruments, especially if there's a drum kit on stage. So in that choice, you have in that case, you have no choice but to go inside the piano itself, and sometimes even put the lid all the way down, which is where mics like these condenser mics you see here are a great choice because of the way they're kind of a side address thing here that can be laid flat, and it allows you to actually close the lid all the way. The reason we like to go with at least 2 mics is because you can see we're kind of able to capture both the high and the low strings and kind of blend those together. Whereas if we only had 1 mic, you would be emphasizing one or the other frequency range a little too much and not really getting the full sound of the piano. So again, sound reinforcement, as deep inside the piano as you can get, kind of 1 high and 1 low. For recording, a few feet out in front. Again, how far depends really on the acoustics of the room that you're miking it in.
Awesome. Great information. I'm going to take this next one. This next one is, which microphone is good for singing? Hey, Gino, guess what? It depends.
It depends. I thought you were going to say KSM8.
Oh, no, definitely. I mean, I personally do like the KSM8. It tends to be my go-to. I don't know if I would necessarily say it is my favorite because microphones are just like, a guitar player with different guitars. A microphone gives you a lot of different options. And if you are a singer, it's fun to start playing around and investing in microphones. But anyway, back to the core of the question. What is this best microphone for singing? There's a lot of factors that go into that. I think the first one we have to take into account is your budget. How much are you looking to spend? If you don't have a lot of money, a $100 SM58 is going to give you just a very consistent performance. Every sound person that you work with is going to know the mic and be familiar with it and not be concerned when you plug it in. And it's just a really good microphone. And like you said, like Gino said, Roger Daltrey uses it. Professionals use it, so don't be fooled by a $100 mic. It is an industry standard for a reason. But beyond that, if you have more to spend and you want to explore different things, there's some general things that I have noticed anecdotally, certain mics, it just kind of depends on the tonality you're going for. I have a very bright, loud, some would say sometimes harsh voice. So I like a microphone with a little bit more depth, like an SM58 or a KSM8. Whereas I work with an alto who has a very low, sort of resonant, booming voice, and she prefers a Beta 58 because it has a little more of a bright tone to it. So the moral of the story is, try out as many as you can. Reach out to your local dealer, talk to them, see if they'll set you up a demo. Put a bunch of mics up, put them on a PA, and sing into them, because you are not going to know what your favorite mic is until you put your voice on it and you hear it and you make that decision. It's a very personal decision, so try them out, and you'll know. When you hear it, you will know which one you like. So that's my answer.
And I'll just add on again, when we're talking about recording, that also opens up some different options too, right? Again, like I mentioned, the SM7 is always my go-to mic for recording Vocalist. But I mean, again, look at the size of this thing. You really don't want this in front of your face on stage necessarily.
Well, and actually somebody asked that later on, so I might as well present that question. Can you use an SM7 or 7B in a live situation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can, but it tends to get used more on like electric guitar or maybe on a kick drum. I've seen it used for that application too. And could you use it for vocals? You could, but again, it's not the most, unless you're trying to hide your face, maybe I wouldn't necessarily go there with it. So
I think it depends. Yeah. Okay. So this next question is about microphone reach. We were talking about how microphones obviously don't necessarily have reach. It's about the environment they're in. So somebody asks, so what about those microphones they use in the NFL games? How do those capture the sound, and how does that apply?
So they're referring to the parabolic microphones. Now what that is, it's you see those guys with holding the big clear plexiglass dish, right? And in the center of that dish is actually an omnidirectional microphone that is at the focal point of the parabola, right? So the sound waves arrive at that dish and they reflect and all kind of reinforce and come together at that single point where the omnidirectional microphone is. So whatever that dish is pointed at whatever's directly on axis with it is picked up and reinforced by those microphones, right? Now those microphones don't sound good. right? They have a very limited, they kind of have this kind of sound quality to them. It's very limited and is, great for picking up the crunching of pads. And you can kind of hear the guys yelling at each other and shouting stuff, but you can't really tell necessarily what they're saying. But it's enough to provide that sort of ambience. And one important thing to keep in mind is that the low frequency response of a parabolic microphone is defined by the size of the dish itself, right? So the more lows you want to get, the bigger that thing needs to be. So that is a very specialized thing there. But again, it's not reaching out and grabbing the sound and bringing it closer. It's just using the reflective dish to reinforce the level of what is getting into it.
Great. So here's kind of a related question. Can you talk about shotgun microphone a little bit? Why are they so long, and how does that work?
Well, so a shotgun microphone is, again, a very highly directional microphone. And that is where a lot of the myth of microphone reach comes from, is the perception, again, is that a shotgun mic works like a zoom lens on your camera, where it makes the, zoom lens makes the image appear closer, right? People think a shotgun makes the sound get closer. But really, what a shotgun does, that long tube is what's called an interference tube. And what it does is that, again, it's more ports, right? Like we talked about the ports that are used to create a directional microphone. The ports along the length of that tube create excellent rejection at the sides of the microphone. So again, so if you think about a cardioid microphone as having about like 120 degree or so acceptance angle, right? That means it's most sensitive in this kind of 120 degree angle. A shotgun microphone tends to be, more like, 90 degrees or 80 degrees. It's just very, even less, 75 degrees, like a very narrow, I hate to say focus, but focus pickup pattern, right? Meaning that it rejects everything happening over on that side and rejects everything happening over on that side to a much greater degree than other microphones do. So then again, the perception is that sound that's way over there, I'm picking that up better. It's not you're not picking that sound up any better. You're just not picking up all the noise happening from the side.
It's about rejection.
Typically, where those microphones get used, it's about rejection. Those mics get used in broadcast applications where there's no sound reinforcement happening. It's only being recorded for later transmission. And those are typically, just out of sight. They're just overhead, pointed down, or they're just behind the camera or back that way, something like that. So that way it can be out of the camera shot, but they're still within a couple of feet. Shotgun mics are used in high noise environments to get better sound when you're, still can be 2, 3, maybe 4 feet from the sound source itself.
Great. Okay, I'm going to start this next one, and then you can pick it up, Gino, if you have any additions. The next question is, please suggest the best mic for outdoor vlogging purposes. I think first, to really understand that, we need to understand better what you're using to vlog. If you're using DSLR, then my suggestion from the Shure portfolio, we have a couple of mini shotgun microphones, the VP83 and the VP83F. Those are basically the same microphone. The only difference is the VP83F has an integrated flash player, so you can record both to a flash disk in addition to your camera's audio. So that would be a good microphone for that. If you're using more of a mobile device, using your phone, then I would suggest looking at the Motive microphones, specifically MV88 if you're using an iOS device, or the MV88 Plus if you're using an iOS or a USB-C enabled Android device that supports third-party microphones. And if you are using the Android device and are interested in the MV88, if you go to the MV88 Plus product page on Shure.com, there is a compatibility link there where we've kind of listed the devices we've been able to thoroughly test. We haven't gotten through all of them, but we've gotten through several of the most popular ones, and you can kind of see if we've been able to check compatibility and how it would work there. So did I get it, Gino? Gino's nodding. We're good.
The only thing I'll add again is that with those mics, if you're vlogging, it means you're videoing probably yourself speaking and you're outdoors. Just keep in mind that the MV88 is a stereo microphone, so it has a pretty wide pickup range, which can be adjusted in the app. So you're probably going to want to make that pickup range as narrow as possible in the Motive app, so that you don't get to try and reduce that ambient sound, and try not to get too far from the microphone itself if you're in a loud environment.
And I'll tack on to that. In addition to, you can either shorten up that stereo width to a very tight pattern, or you can also choose to just activate the the cardioid element in that microphone as well. So you're only doing the front facing microphone. Two different ways to kind of get some more directionality out of that microphone. So. Okay, next question.
Can I just say that I'm impressed that we're an hour and 40 minutes into this and there's still 160 people on here?
These are great questions. These are inquiring minds want to know.
Well, thanks for hanging with us.
And like I said, if you have to jump off, we'll include these in the recorded version so you can check back into it when it's available in a couple of days. Okay, next question. Does changing the grill on a mic like a Beta 58 change the frequency response of the mic?
Changing the grill. Well,
so I think a good example would be the 58 versus the 57. The SM58 versus 57.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're getting at there. Because I was going to say you don't have a lot of options to change the grill yourself, but I mean, yeah, there are different grill options that don't cut to the chase. No, they don't affect the pattern really at all of the microphone. The ports are the ports. The grill is all those grills are designed in a way that they don't interfere with what the ports are doing. And there are a lot of people I know actually who, for example, they might want a Beta 57 wireless, which we don't make, but we do make a Beta 58. And if you take the Beta 58 grill off and put the Beta 57 grill on the wireless, then it has now become a Beta 57 essentially. So if you really want that, you can do it and it's not going to affect the pattern at all.
Great. All right. I'm going to start with this next one. What would be the next mic step from a Beta 58 for a band situation? Vocalist using a harmonizer. I like the Beta 58 and the E945, but was looking for the next level, or are those the best solutions? I think it kind of, once again, depends on what you're looking for. I mean, if you really like the sound of the mics you're using, you might not need to change. But definitely in terms of, price level, you could try something out, like I said, the KSM8, which I'm using, which is a great dynamic option. You could try a condenser microphone like the KSM9. I use the KSM9 pretty religiously before the KSM8 came out, and I also do like that microphone and do go back to it every once in a while. It's a condenser. The Beta 87, there's both the Beta 87A and C, which are also condenser microphones that a lot of people tend to like. Difference between those two is the polar pattern. The A is a supercardioid and the C is cardioid. So there are definitely options to move up in the lines if you would like. I would say try to find a dealer once again that's willing to let you come out and demo a couple once obviously things are back to normal. And try them out, and you'll know if there's one that you like better than what you currently are using. So, any additions there, Gino?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. I'm gonna start kind of picking through these because I know we're running super long. Yeah,
I'm getting hungry.
Me too. Okay. Do you have any techniques for dealing? Oh, this is a good question for me because this is something that I am really bad about. Do you have any techniques for dealing with plosives, like harsh P sounds and T's and shooshes? I'm horrible with P's. I am a P popper. I'm sure you just heard it there. So any suggestions there, Gino?
Minimizing pops. Well, there are several ways to do it. The most popular thing that people do is add a windscreen, right? And there's one that's kind of one of the main advantages of the more large, the more bulbous the windscreen is, the better it is at reducing the P pops, right? I mean, I don't know if I can make it pop.
There you go.
Right, so it's probably hard to hear on the webinar anyway. But the windscreens are, again, they not only reduce wind noise, of course, but they reduce P popping and T popping, which is also basically just wind noise, right? Actually, the best way though to minimize P popping is to be at the side of the microphone instead of directly on it. Even though we tend to do this a lot, right? If you think about, again, that breath blast, when I right? Like that's a blast of air going right into the microphone itself. But when I move around to the side, you still pick up my voice, but now the air blast goes past the mic element, the diaphragm, instead of directly into it. So if it's really a problem, that, even when you're using handheld microphones, right? I mean, you see a lot of people do this, right? But actually, if you do this, you're less likely to get that breath blast because, again, the P pop is going to go past the microphone instead of directly into it. So a windscreen, mic positioning, and also if your mixer has a low cut on it, again, that breath blast is low frequencies typically. So if you can engage that low cut, that will also minimize it.
Great. Okay, can you tell the polar pattern of a microphone just by looking at it?
Nope. The only thing you can tell, again, is if it's totally sealed, right, and has no rear ports, then it's probably Omni. But that might be hard to discern specifically. So generally, no.
Okay, we're going to talk about distance a little bit more, so brace yourself. Is there an optimum distance for the best frequency response according to each microphone characteristic?
Distance from the sound source. Well, with omnidirectional microphones, no. With unidirectional microphones, it depends, right? Because it's the proximity effect that changes the low frequency response of the microphone. I will say that after you get about 2 feet or so away from a directional microphone, the proximity effect doesn't really change any longer. So you know what, if you're looking to have proximity effect not be an issue, then you should be 2 feet away from the microphone, which in a live sound scenario is never going to work, right? But ultimately, when dealing with directional mics, it really depends on, again, what you think of the sound, right? If you like a lot of proximity effect, then get right on the microphone, and if you want less of it, then move further away. But again, as far as distance goes, that's the only thing that affects the frequency response is that proximity effect on directional mics.
Great. Okay, which is better for a work from home web conferencing scenario, the MV5 or the MV51?
It depends. Sorry. So the MV51 is more expensive, and I would argue, again, in my opinion, sounds better. That's kind of why it's more money. Is it's just a nicer microphone element in there and sounds a little more natural. And then to answer the question more specifically, though, I'd probably save a few bucks and go with the MV5 because ultimately, again, when you're going through the codecs of a web conferencing application, you're not going to hear the difference. MV5 is totally fine.
There you go.
MV51 is more designed for people who are doing more kind of mobile device recording, right? Like if you're a singer-songwriter and you want to get good sound for your mobile recording, then definitely MV51 is going to make a difference for you.
So I think if you're looking for something for just the web conferencing MV5, but if you also plan on laying down some sweet tracks, maybe think about going up to the 51. Who knows?
Exactly.
All right. What type or exact microphone would you recommend? There's 2 questions here for recording a trumpet and for an alto sax.
Well, I would say the answer is probably the same for both because typically what works well for any brass or wind instruments, they tend to work well for all of them. Probably for recording, I would go with if budget is an issue, something just like an SM57, right? You want something affordable that's going to sound good. That kind of shaped response of a typical dynamic mic works great. If you have a little more to spend, the ribbon mics are awesome. And the reason for that, again, is if you think about the kind of dark characteristic I mentioned that they have, is good for an instrument that can be somewhat harsh, especially when you're close to it. Again, think about a trumpet, right? You typically don't listen to a trumpet with your ear 6 inches from it, right? That would hurt. Not just in terms of level, but even just in terms of the frequency response. But often in recording, that's where the microphone needs to go. So if you're going to put a mic that close, something that darkens up the sound like a ribbon mic, like our KSM 313, for example, would be a great choice for that. But again, that's, do you want to spend $1,300 on a microphone or do you want to spend $89 on a microphone? And if you only have $89, the SM57s would be great.
Great. All right, next question. What Shure mic would you recommend for a vocalist who really goes for it in the high mids in a live application? Who could answer this question?
It sounds like you.
As a very loud, high, screamy singer, I tend to be accused of screaming on pitch just as much as singing. I would say that my go-tos, an SM58 is great for that application. It's going to add a little extra depth and warmth. If you want to move up and kind of move up the line, KSM8. I also, like I said, use the KSM9. And just to be perfectly clear, I use the KSM9HS. KSM9 is a condenser microphone that has swappable polar patterns. The original version has a switchable polar pattern between cardioid and supercardioid. The HS is kind of unique because the swappable pattern on that is between subcardioid, which is kind of an almost omni pattern, and hypercardioid, which is super, super tight. So I really liked that one when I used it too. I've never blown out a vocal performance microphone, and I've been called into the PLC at Shure headquarters to try and blow out lavalier microphones, and have done it. So any of those microphones would work great. I think it's just a matter also of the tonality of the voice. If it's kind of that brighter, harsher thing, I would go with something like an SM58. If it's more of a darker tone, I would maybe try something like a Beta 58 or a Beta 87. But, it's really just about personal preference. So.
And you do make a good point there again, which is, again, a misconception I think that people have, which is often that, like, for example, the Beta 87A is a very bright microphone. And a lot of people tend to have the misconception of like, well, I have a very bright voice, so I want a mic that'll capture that, so I'm going to get a bright microphone. But it's the opposite, right? Because that's just going to make you probably sound unnaturally bright. You typically want a microphone that's going to complement your voice, not add more to what's already there.
Unless that's what you're going for.
Well,
I mean,
of course.
Yes.
Right.
It's really,
it depends.
Try them out. Question for you, Gino. Are you using a cloud lifter or fathead with the SM7? Does Shure recommend one or the other, or some similar products for use with the SM7B? And does Shure make something similar?
Okay, let's see. There's like 3 questions in there. Last question first. No, we don't make anything similar. The cloud lifter tends to be very popular. There's what's the one? SC Electronics, I think, makes the one that looks like a stick of dynamite.
It's called the DM1.
That one's popular. Yeah, that one. And we don't really recommend any one over the other. I think they all seem to do a pretty good job. I am not using any of those things because I'm actually running into a Mackie Onyx Firewire interface, so mixer. So again, like I mentioned, it has 60 dB of gain available, which is why it works. But again, like I said, not all mixers do. So if your mixer doesn't have 60 dB, then you would need one of those devices.
Great. Okay, next question. Can you use the null on the back of the Beta 57 to help pick up some of the hi-hat?
You could. Yeah, most people try to avoid that, but it certainly could. Again, remember, it's going to be, like you heard, darker sounding. It's kind of it's not the most beautiful sound back there, but maybe for hi-hats, that's okay because they're kind of bright and washy anyway. So it's all just about how you place it. And if you get that, then you could certainly take advantage of it.
Great. Can you mic the sound holes of a piano for a choral concert, and which mics are ideal?
Well, again, can you? Sure. Nothing's stopping you. Will it sound good? Again, well, anytime you're miking an acoustic piano for live performance, it's always going to be a bit of a compromise. You're never going to be able to get the mic in the right spot. What I would say is try it. I would probably use, again, a flat response condenser mic. That's pretty much anytime you're miking a piano, something like our KSM 137 or Beta 181 would be great. Another thing that people sometimes do is put a boundary microphone inside the piano. Something like our Beta 91A, which is typically more of a kick drum mic, but if you want something flat that you can just kind of like use some Velcro and stick it inside the piano and shut the lid all the way, that could potentially work as well. But again, it's one of those things you gotta try it out and see if the sound quality is acceptable to you.
Great. Okay, next question. There's a couple parts to it. What is the big difference between the SM57 and 58? If you said they're basically the same, this person points out that they noticed that they see the SM57 being used in White House press conferences. So what's the difference, and why would they go with that one?
Again, the difference is only the fact, physically, that the 58 has the ball style windscreen on it, right? And that makes it better for up close vocal use because, again, it reduces the breath noise and the P-pops and also adds a little bit of extra layer of protection for the mic element itself. Now, if you watch presidential press conferences, the SM57s are down on the podium, not right up close. So, and they're kind of pointed up again at that angle, right?
Until recently.
So, until recently, right. Yeah, they're not there anymore. But from going back to Lyndon Johnson, they were. And they're at an angle, so the plosives are going past, so you don't have to worry about that. But they do have those big honking windscreens on them anyway, the outdoor windscreens, right? So they can be used outdoors for that application, and they're just lower profile. Again, the 57, right? It's because it doesn't have that ball. It just is, it's. I mean, I can just hold them right up here, right? It's just less visible. So when you're on camera, you just don't want to see it, right? So again, either one can be used in either application. There are vocalists who like to use the SM57 because they want even more proximity effect. And just the fact that it doesn't have that ball grill allows you to get your mouth just that much even closer, and you get even more proximity effect, right? So that can help. Again, now you have to worry about pee popping and breath noises, but assuming you can deal with that, you can get a little bit closer. But again, otherwise, they really are the same. You just don't need that ball windscreen when you're using it as an instrument microphone. But could you use a 58? Sure. Could you take the grill off your 58 and use it like an SM57? It doesn't have the protective cap on top of it, but you could. So yeah, they are very similar in that regard.
All right. Next question. You said the only difference between the SM7 and the SM7B is the grill. If I was able to acquire an SM7 and an SM7B grill, would I notice any difference?
It's not the grill, it's the windscreen itself. Yeah. Good question. But no, I mean, we've been making this microphone as it just doesn't affect the sound quality at all, but there was an SM7A. The SM7A has an additional humbucking coil in it, because in broadcast studios, when they started getting more computerized in the 90s, and there was CRTs. This is before people were using flat screen displays. The CRT in close proximity, the original SM7 would cause hum in the microphone. So that's why we added the coil in the A to minimize that hum. And then when we came out with the B, we just started including the fat windscreen with it. We changed nothing else.
So there you go. Okay, I like this next question. And I think we do have an answer to this because we've worked with bands like this. Which Shure mic is best for a 4-piece bluegrass group where all the vocals and instruments are several feet away from a single mic?
Yeah, that's how you mic that application, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to make it easy. KSM44A.
Done.
Large diaphragm condenser mic with a nice shock mount. Locking shock mount and selectable polar patterns. It works great for that.
Perfect. All right, I'm gonna add a disclaimer to the top of after I present this next question because it's kind of a hot button issue. Suggestions on cleaning or disinfecting vocal mics. Look, you knew it was going to happen, Gino. So I'm going to start by saying that we can't really tell you how to disinfect your mic. We are a microphone company, an audio company. We are not doctors. We are not medical health professionals. So we would recommend, if you are looking for information on how to disinfect anything, to reach out to your local health provider, your local CDC representatives. We just can't really give you any information. We can talk to you about generally cleaning a microphone, however. And we do have some great resources available on Shure.com. If you just go there and search mic cleaning, you can find some great tips and tricks on how to clean microphones, but we can't really talk so much about disinfecting. Did I get it?
Yes. I mean, yeah, there's an FAQ actually on cleaning mics. It probably pops right up on the trending articles when you go to the FAQ page, because of course it's being asked a lot. And I think, 3 weeks ago, it's pretty much all I did all week long was answer questions about that.
Yeah.
And hence the point that Cheryl made, which is that we can't speak to how effective a disinfecting technique is. So the FAQ on our website has some general techniques for cleaning a microphone without damaging it. But we can't say if that actually is effective in disinfecting it. Sometimes people will ask us, they'll say, okay, well, if I use such and such, will it damage the microphone? Again, I get be a little bit careful there because, warranty issues and things like that. But your typical sort of Lysol disinfecting wipes with 70% alcohol, they're probably not going to hurt the mic. Again, I wouldn't dunk the microphone in 70% alcohol solution and leave it sitting there. But the wipes, again, we put our mics through some pretty pretty strict, pretty rugged testing environments, right? And so an alcohol wipe is not going to destroy your microphone if you want to give it a good scrub down with one of those.
But it's also a good time to talk about, why it is kind of important if you are a singer, if you're a vocalist, consider investing in your own microphone. I own my own microphones and I'm obsessive about them. And I'm the diva when the announcer walks up to my mic on stage to make an announcement where I cringe and point to another mic. Just because,
Not mine.
because, a microphone is actually something that, I get up close to my microphone. My mouth touches my microphone. It is a very personal, intimate piece of equipment. So if you are a vocalist or someone that, needs a vocal microphone, consider spending at least $100 to get your own SM58. It'll give you some peace of mind. So just my little singer PSA. All right. We didn't quite get to all of the questions, believe it or not. So if we didn't get to
my God.
I know, right? I know.
1 o'clock.
I know. If we didn't get to your question, many, many, many apologies. And please feel free to go to shure.com/contact to open up a ticket with our support team. That's Gino's team. So many well-knowledged guys and gals on that team. I go to them constantly with my questions. They can answer so many audio questions. If they don't know the answer, they will work on finding it. They're a great team. Shure.com/support.
I'll add on to that. Obviously, Cheryl wouldn't be pushing this if it wasn't obvious, but we're functional, right? We have the means in place to be able to keep our support, both phone and email contact support going for the near future. Because again, if you don't know, we're in Illinois, just outside of Chicago, and Illinois is on a stay-at-home order through the end of April, at least at this point. But we're still open for business. So reach out at any time with any questions you have, and we'll do our best to help you out.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to present one more question here because it's for me and it's a good way to end this session. When is the next session? So we are going to be doing another webinar. We used to do these once a month, but because people have so much extra time and want some extra knowledge, we're doing some weekly webinars for the coming month or so. And so we will be doing one of these next Wednesday at 11 a.m. It's going to be on some tips for home conferencing. So very definitely hot on everybody's mind right now. We do not have the registration page just up yet. Please bear with us. We normally have a little bit more time to get these lined up, so we are working furiously behind the scenes. If you are registered for our newsletter, you should be getting a notification, an email notification about it. But you can also get more information when it's available at shure.com/webinar, and hopefully that registration link will be available no later than Friday of this week. So thank you all so very much for joining us. Thank you for all of your great questions. I hope you guys learned something. I know I sure did. This was a lot of fun. Stay safe, stay sane, stay healthy, and we will talk to you next week. Bye, everybody.